Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Um, I I'm Woody Zool, and I'm a software developer who's been writing software for about 35 or so years. And I'm going to share with you something that I find to be really cool, and I'm hoping you'll find some interest in it as well. Essentially, the ideas that I'm going to share today grew out of the experiences of a team that I worked with in 2011. And we worked the way I'm going to describe for 4 years, and they continue working that way now. But this slide that I'm showing you right now, it talks about my approach to the work that I do. The value of another's experience is to give us hope, not to tell us how or whether to proceed. And my point with this is that I don't think I can tell you what you should do or whether or not you should do it or how you would go about doing it, but I can share with you what we did and our motivations for doing it and why we continue doing it. And perhaps that'll be useful to you. That's my hope. Joshua Karievsky told me, always put a picture of a cat into every presentation you do, because that makes people think you're more human than you actually are. So I'm doing that here. This is my choice of a picture of a cat. The world is a cat playing with Australia. I love that picture. So these things that we did, I'm sharing you, they started at a place called Hunter Industries. They're a manufacturer of landscaping, irrigation products mostly, but also lighting and some other things. But I share this just to honor them, that I was given the opportunity there to do some, I would consider really wonderful things. And it was purely coincidental, whatever, that we ended up doing the things I'm sharing with you here. But I think that it's based on their byline, built on innovation. So mob programming itself is kind of grows out of the idea of agile. And in agile software development, I think the people who originated the idea realized that we'll benefit from from collaboration, and we collaborate better if we have a few things in place to make it easy for us to work together. One of those is we have to be working on the same thing. If we're not working on the same thing, then we're not really collaborating. If we work it on this, if we're working on it at the same time, then that's sort of, to me, another requirement. But if we're working in the same space, that just merely enhances our ability to collaborate. But I will make a point, mob programming can be done remotely as well. We'll talk about that only a little bit during this introduction. The thing is, the main difference between those ideas and mob programming is that the whole team's going to be gathered together to work at the same time, in the same space, on the same thing, sitting in front of a single computer. We're working at the same computer. Now, there can be other computers around. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But this is the basic idea. We're truly collaborating on the same thing, and we're doing it at the same computer. We're going to gather together all the skills we need, all the knowledge, all the capability will be represented in the people that are on this team. We're completely different in our skills and our perspectives, but we're going to work together for a single goal, a single thing we're trying to accomplish. It looks like this from the front. And this is a team of about, I think it looks like there's 7 of us there that day. And we have every skill represented right here on this team that's needed to do the software we're writing. There's a product owner there, there's a database expert, there's 2 or 3 coders, there's a tester. And at that time, I was working as a facilitator with this team, although I had been working as a coder on the team up to this time. I'm the person who's standing there. So this is what it looks like from the back, just to give you another view. At that time, we were using projectors to project our image of our computer, but nowadays we use monitors. I think I've got some pictures that'll show that as well. But you can see everybody's sitting around one table. There are other computers there, but all of our actual work is going through, into our code base, our changes to our database and so on, and our testing is being done on a computer that's right in the center there. And it's got a book on top of it that says CSS on it, so you can see where that's at. We actually, as a team, did almost everything we did together, working as a team rather than breaking up into individuals working at different cubicles. So this seems crazy, right? It really is. It's contrary to reason or common sense. It's utterly absurd or ridiculous. And yet, all over the world, people are now working this way. I literally get emails or messages daily from somebody else who's now doing it at their company. So there are a lot of people doing it. If it wasn't working, I don't think they'd be doing it. This is another view of the same company where we started, and this is after we'd grown for 4 or 5 years, and we had now, rather than just having the one team, there are 8 or 6 or so teams doing it, and now I believe they have 8 or 9 teams working that way. That was Hunter Industries. But here's a group in Alaska. I'm going to go through these really quickly so we can kind of stay on track. Here's a group in the UK. Here's a group in Boston, which I happen to be in Boston right at this moment. At this company, when I visited them, they had something like 6 teams working, doing it, their programming as mob programming. Here's a group in Stockholm at a company named TUI, and they have 6 or 8 teams working this way as well. Another group, this is in Zito in San Diego, California. They have 5 or 6 teams working this way. Unruly in London, when I last visited them, had something like 6 or so teams working this way. Another group in London, a group in South Africa, a group in Florida. Here's a team working remotely doing mob programming. So on this session, they have 4 people working, and they're all sitting in different cities. This is a company called Corgi Bytes. They're out of Richmond, Virginia, and I know that the person at the top there is in Richmond, and the person on the bottom of that view is in New York City. So they're spread out across the East Coast. That's one thing I'll note about working remotely. It's best if you're not too far apart in time zones. Here's a photo someone shared with me of them teaching classes at Harvard, Agile software development classes using mob programming. Now, clearly, I don't think this is mob programming, but it sure looks like it to me. That person in the middle is Grace Hopper, Admiral Grace Hopper. She's a fundamental pioneer computer person who I believe her team was the team that wrote the first compiler ever. But this looks to me like the same thing. All the brilliant minds working on the same thing at the same time and in the same space. So this is, at least if it's not really mob programming, it has the spirit of mob programming. Here's a team in Greece, some people in France, a group in Sweden. Here's a group in Japan. This really intrigued me. I visited Japan and found several teams working around a table that was where they would actually sit on the floor. Another team in Japan where they're sitting at desks, so clearly it can go either way. And the last photo about this I want to show you, this is of course not mob programming, but this is the same spirit of mob programming. They have everybody they need gathered together to work on the same thing at the same time. Now clearly there was work that had to come before, but but if we think about the task at hand, everybody that's needed to do this launch and this mission is there together at NASA Mission Control. Each has their own expertise that they bring to it, but they have to gather together to accomplish the overall goal. So whenever I share this, I always get a question. It's invariable. Somebody will ask me, how can we be productive with 5 people at one computer? And initially, I pretty much had to say, I don't really know how we can be productive. It's just that we are productive. What we noticed was, because we were paying a lot of attention. Matter of fact, I'm going to make a little point about that. My dad used to tell me that good things happen if you pay attention. So I think I pretty much have learned how to do that. We are always paying attention to what's going on around us, and that helps us sense is something working or not. And what we noticed for ourselves was when we would work separately, and this is kind of demonstrating this, it's like people in different cubicles, and then we add together the work that those people did, we would get a certain amount done. But when we worked together, we would get a lot more done. And it wasn't just that we were getting more done. Like, it's not just more stuff, but we were working on the more important things, the more valuable and the more useful things, the things that were more meaningful to our end users and to our customers. We were also, I would say, from an internal point of view, getting a much better quality. The code was in better shape. It was better organized. It was what you nowadays would call clean code. We had a lot of tests around it. So all the things that made it easier and better to work on the code so that we could work just as fast tomorrow as we could work done, we were getting that into our code. But we were also getting much higher quality from the point of view of our end users. They were getting the software that they wanted, and it was virtually or almost bug-free. It wasn't completely, but in the 3.5 years I worked there, after we started working this way, we only had reported back to us 3 bugs in our bug tracking system on about 40 projects or something like that that we had done. We were getting a much higher level of quality into all of our work. So often when I do a workshop on this, I do workshops about mob programming now. Why would we work this way is a question that I ask the people who have gathered. And I'll show this picture and say, why would we gather like this and all work together? And I'll ask them to give me the idea of why they think this could be good. And these are the things we normally hear. We get knowledge sharing. Everybody is leveling up on their knowledge of everything we're doing. We're getting continuous code and design review. That leads to better quality. We're getting a lot of perspectives on the work, which leads to better solutions usually. Also, we're getting rapid feedback, so we're no longer waiting days or weeks to hear back whether our idea is what we want it to be. Everybody involved, including the product owner, including the testers, are sitting with the coders and the database folks, and we're getting this work done in a rapid feedback manner. This allows us to focus on the right things. I'm going to re-emphasize that. These things all allow us to focus on the more meaningful stuff, and we start dropping our attention on the things that just don't matter. It's a lot easier to focus on the right things when everybody is there doing it together. This eliminates the queues that we normally get in software, and it reduces inventory. Queues are anytime we need to wait to get an answer to a question that's blocking us. And reducing inventory means, well, what inventory is, in a lean sense of the word, is anything that we've started on that isn't yet in the customer's hand and they're using it to deliver the value they need. What that means is that we have nothing that's sitting around for a long time that we've worked on, waiting for us to finish it so we can deliver it. We can deliver things much more rapidly. This enhances the flow of the work. And it's a beautiful thing about all of these gather together to lead to better solutions. And even more so, besides getting more stuff done and at a very much higher quality, we found that we were working in a less stressful way that was more fun, more engaging. So here's where I want to go with this. This question that I ask about why would we work this way has a different way to answer it. And this is more for the managers in the audience. We work this way because the team decided to work this way. If the team didn't have the freedom to figure out how they could best get their work done, we may never stumbled upon this idea. I'm going to share more about that in a few moments, but I want to make it clear. All the good things that we noticed were why we kept doing it, but that we got to do it at all was because the team was allowed to figure out how they would best work. As managers, we often fall into what Peter Drucker said about management. He's a famous management guru. He said, paraphrasing him, much of what we do in management is simply making it hard for people to get their work done. We need to figure that out, managers. I've been a manager much of my life, along with being a programmer, and I think that's an important thing to pay attention to. So we've covered what it is and why we would do it. I want to cover a little bit of a technique that we use. Maybe not a lot, just a little bit, because we only have a limited amount of time. But this will give you an idea of how this could possibly be organized. So clearly, it's not 5 people watching one person coding. That would be like programming theater or something. And you can actually go online nowadays and watch somebody streaming as their work as they're working on a game or something they're working on. But that's not what mob programming is. Mob programming is truly all of these people working together, thinking together about the same thing. We use a technique we call driver navigators. Everybody on the team is a navigator, but for a very short period of time in a little rotation, which I'll explain in a minute, we have somebody at the keyboard. There's only one person operating the keyboard at any particular moment. Everybody on the team is considered a navigator, except for when they're at the keyboard. That's a special position, and I'll explain that now. We basically have this concept. For an idea to go from someone's head into the computer, it must go through someone else's hands. Now, I learned this from Llewellyn Falco about 10 years ago. And once I started applying that to my pair programming, because that's where I learned it, it kind of stuck with me, and I started using it more and more. When we transformed into doing mob programming, we took this along with us. It's something that I was teaching the rest of the team about when I first started at Hunter. I'll explain a little more about that in a moment. But this is the idea. We have the keyboard, and almost everybody uses a keyboard in software development. Not everybody, but almost everybody. And we use a keyboard because it's kind of the default way of getting our code or our artifacts or our emails or whatever into the computer. But mob programming and using this model replaces the keyboard, as far as the rest of the team is concerned, with the driver. So this frees up the team to stay in the problem space as a navigators, and they're kind of, well, you could think of it this way: we're decoupling the writing of the code from the thinking about the problem and the solution. We use a timer in the way that we do this work, but you don't need to use a timer. And we rotate the driver every few minutes. In this case, I'm showing 4 to 7 minutes. When we first started working this way, we were rotating about every 4 minutes, and it increased to about 15 minutes over time. And then we brought it back down and found that 4 to 7 minutes seems to be best, or at least it's worked best for us. But I want to make it clear, I'm not telling you how to do it. You can figure that out for yourself. This is a little animation. I don't know how well it's going to work over this over our remote session here, but see if you can watch this. Basically what happens is somebody takes a turn at the keyboard, and somebody will probably say, well, let's write a test for this thing we want to do. And as we give the instructions to the person at the keyboard as about what we want, everybody is also thinking about their own expertise and how that comes into play. Now, there's not enough time in a very short webinar like this for me to go into details, but the basic idea is we're switching out the person at the keyboard frequently, and everybody's interacting to come up with the ideas that we're going to put into the computer. Some people don't want to take the keyboard. They're not required to. It's totally voluntary. But everybody that's there is there because the knowledge and skills they have. So even if they're not taking the keyboard, they're sharing their ideas about what needs to go into our code. How are we going to solve the problem at hand? Okay, so I'm going to show you a little bit about the driver itself. Their main job is to act as a smart input operator. They can understand what the navigators are saying to them and convert it into code. And we need to navigate at the level that the person at the keyboard, the driver, is able to accept. What that basically means is we give more detail if they need more detail, and less detail if they don't need so much detail. You can think about it as a navigator in the car. Let's say I'm taking a drive with my wife to go to a wedding a few towns over, and I'm holding the map and she's at the steering wheel. I might say, well, get on the freeway going east, and she'll know how to do that. I don't need to give her any more advice or any more direction. But I might need to tell her, hey, the off ramp we're going to turn off on is coming up in a couple miles, so she'll know to move off to the right of the road, if you're driving in the US anyways. And then as we get closer, I'll say, yeah, it's the next turn off. So you see, I'm giving the details only as needed. Basically, this liberates the team to focus on the right stuff. And in my little example of the driving, it allows my wife to pay attention to slowing up and speeding down as needed, stopping when she gets to a red light, all the things she can do without my direction. We're going to try, the driver's job is to help the team remain in flow by not having them just pay too much attention to exactly the details of the code that's going in. We're still doing a code review as we go, but we're keeping most of our attention on where do we want to go next. So the drivers, I like to think of the driver conceptually as being an extension of the computer for the few minutes while they're at the keyboard. Let's go on a little bit and see what more we can cover. This is the team, and the team is going to remain in the same context, so they can be focusing on all of us on the same thing at this moment. Now, we don't need to be deeply in focus, just sufficiently focused so we can contribute the right thing when it's our time to contribute. We're sharing the cognitive load. So I don't need to be, let's say I'm a front-end programmer, I don't need to be thinking about my database needs. The database person is there thinking about it. So everybody can focus more on their specialty without worrying as much about how it interacts with the other specialties that are represented in the code that we're writing. We're going to use dialogue of talking and listening. So this is how we communicate. Listening is really important, and it's difficult for us to do. We have to study and practice listening. We have this idea of visual thinking, so we're going to use a whiteboard. It gives us a temporary memory location to keep the thinking of the team visible to everybody, so we don't have to explain things over and over again. We're continuously sharing and integrating our ideas. This comes also from Joshua Karieski, who said this about pair programming. Pair programming is the continuous integration of ideas. And it's sort of the same thing here. We're looking to contribute the right thing at the right time and in the right way. So we have to be paying sufficient attention to be able to contribute our specialty, how it interplays with the rest of the things that are going on at the right time. We don't need to share every idea that we have at every moment or the instant we have the idea. We need to learn how to collaboratively share our ideas, which often means allowing an idea that's already in play to be discussed or tried before we share the new idea. And this works out quite well. So I'm going to share a little bit now about how this started, because this answers a few questions for people. I feel we discovered mob programming rather than invented mob programming. I'm going to skip some of the things I normally cover and give you a short version of this story. They were looking to hire a manager for a team that was having some problems. Mostly, they had some late projects that were very late, and they weren't collaborating really well. They were working on a number of different things and very rarely actually collaborating. So one of the things we knew we needed to do was to figure out how to work well together so that we could take better advantage of being able to collaborate. We also kind of followed this idea that's been with me a long time. I think a lot of people believe this as well. It's the people doing the work can best determine how to manage that work. Usually you'll see a manager thinking they need to figure out how to divide the work up and who should do what and how we're going to organize everything. But I found that teams can figure this stuff out for themselves. Most people working doing software development are pretty smart people. And if they're given the chance, they'll do a real great job of figuring this stuff out for themselves. A self-organizing, self-managing team. We had some code issues. The code wasn't as good as it should be. There was a lot of bad code, I would say, in their projects. And I believe firmly that if we can understand how to write clean code, or only do code that's easy to work on, easy to maintain, nicely decoupled, clearly is what we now would consider in the modern idea tidy and easy to work on code, we're going to have an advantage. But this team needed to learn to do that. So we set aside some time for learning. And we called this our weekly practice sessions. Every week we would spend 3 hours on Fridays studying together the things that we needed to learn to do. I believe studying together is a good thing for another purpose as well. First of all, it shows us we are really focused on getting better at our skills, but also it's helping us learn how to collaborate and work with each other without the pressure of doing actual work. So we get a double benefit out of it. To do this study, we decided to use a coding dojo style. I won't go into the details of what a coding dojo is, but it's a way of practicing together. And in our particular mechanism that we were going to use, the person who is, we're basically going to switch out pairs every few minutes. There's going to be a person navigating and a person driving, and everyone else is observing and thinking about what they want to do when it's their turn to navigate. I don't think we would have stumbled upon the idea of mob programming if we hadn't been practicing this style of coding dojo for learning about clean code and the things we wanted to learn, how to break stories down and things like that. So essentially, with those two things, along with the idea of we're going to do good retrospectives where we get good results from them, not just do them to tick off retrospectives on our list of things we need to do. And in so doing, we started doing retrospectives daily. 5 minutes or so at the end of each day, we would ask ourselves, what went well today? And then we'd say, what can we do to turn that up for tomorrow? Tomorrow, what would we do with what we learned today so that it will make tomorrow even better? Well, we were learning to apply these little ideas for about 6 months. And then one day, it came time to look at a project for a couple of the developers that were having a lot of trouble on something. And I said, what do you want to do? And they said, well, let's get everybody together into a meeting, and then we'll look at it and we'll decide how to go forward on this project. But instead of just having that meeting where we gathered together to try to get an idea about what we might do, we started working on the code. That's a big difference from a normal meeting. As we started working on it together, we were making really good progress over a couple hours. And at the end of a couple hours, when we needed to leave the meeting room, somebody came into the room and said, hey, we've got this room scheduled for our meeting, so you'll all have to leave. Somebody on the team with quite a bit of urgency said, why don't we just go find another room and move over there? So this was telling me something good was happening. We were all feeling it. And we went and we found another room, and we immediately went to this other room. And in that room, somebody immediately said, why don't we just book rooms for the rest of the day so we know where to go to after lunch? There's the meeting rooms at Hunter were spread out across different buildings. So you get the idea, I hope. The team was recognizing something good is going on here, and we don't want to stop. We were getting a lot done. We were getting a higher quality. We were having a lot of fun, and we were learning a lot. So we noticed these good things happening. It was these little practices to led to this fulfillment of this idea. I learned this when I was in my 20s. I'm now in my 60s. I've used this throughout my life. The object isn't to make art. It's to be in that wonderful state which makes art inevitable. What this means to me is if we create an environment where great things can happen, then people will do great things. Let's figure out how to make that environment. That kind of takes us to the end of what I want to share. And I think we can probably open up the floor to questions if there are any.